Salud. Alright, how's everyone doing today? Well, here it is. It's time to build some knife handles. I'm going to have to do this over a couple of days, so bear with me. I'm going to edit everything together, and I'll do the best I can to keep this as short as possible. The one thing to consider when you are making knife handles, or rather installing your knife handles, is that you're going to be using adhesives more than likely. At least that's the process that I'm going to show you. And in the installation of those scales using the adhesive that you choose, there's going to be some curing time before you can get to the next stage. And if you hadn't figured it out by now, this is the last and final episode of From Concept to Cutting Edge. That is the series dedicated towards taking you through the step-by-step process that I follow when making a knife. And again, let me reiterate that this is only my process. I'm not saying that this is the only way, the best way, or anything like that. This is just what happens to be working for me and the process that I'm following currently. Alright, so up until this point, we have got our blade, which I have hidden here, completely prepped and ready for installing the knife handles. It's ready to go. The finish is about where we want it, except for some final adjustments you'll be making at the very end when you're doing some polishing and cleaning. So besides the knife handle, what are we going to need to do this job? A couple of sets of clamps. Definitely not going to hurt you there. I got a razor blade. I'll be using that regularly. I've got some tape. I've got a ruler. You never know if you're going to need it. Some rubbing alcohol. Some wipes. And the scales. In this case, I have chosen rosewood. And one little tip before you get started. What I've done here on these scales is gotten them on the very face. This is the edge that's going to meet up like this. That's going to be a pain to try to polish and clean and get ready once you get it put on the knife. So what I try to do is finish it off as best I can right here on the edge. That includes any kind of bevels. Now in this instance, I'm opting not to put a bevel on it, but it's completely up to you. One other thing that we need, and I left it, where did I put it? It's not here, it's over there. Wax paper. Nothing special, just basic wax paper. Okay, so what am I going to do with all this stuff? Well, at the end of the day, what I'm going to have to do is prep this knife, get it ready as best as I possibly can to accept the scale. If you notice, I already put the liners on the scale, and that's really pretty straightforward. I just took the liners that I wanted to use, mixed up the epoxy, sandwiched them together, let them dry, and they're ready to go. So now I've got a scale with a liner. I've got another scale with another liner. When I go to get started, the first thing I do is I'm going to take my paper towel, fold it up, get me a little rubbing alcohol, and I'm going to go ahead and wipe the knife down. Try to get it as clean as I can, just get any kind of fingerprints and oils or anything like that. When I go to put the epoxy on, I don't want to have a hell of a mess on my hands. So what I'll do is I'll take a piece of tape, plug up these holes. When you go to put your scales on, you're going to want to decide where the scale is going to go. How far up do I want it to go? Do I want it to go to here? Do I want it to go to here? All the way up to this edge? That's a decision that you're going to have to make. Now what I do, I've seen it done a lot of different ways, but the way that I choose to do this is, let me go ahead and clean this off while I'm thinking about it. Try to keep everything as dust-free and as lint-free and as clean as you possibly can when you're working on these things. Okay, so essentially what I'm going to do before I do anything with epoxy is I take the knife and I go through it and I look and I say, oh yeah, it's got a little fingerprint mark right there, it's got a little stickum. Just get it all clean, because once you get these handles on, you're going to have a bear of a time trying to get it, trying to clean it after the fact. You're going to want to try to figure out where this knife is going to end, like I said, and I figured it's going to be right about here. Now, I like to take this, and I'll put this tape on right here. Now, that's not done, that's not complete. Essentially, that's kind of marking where I want it to go. And I want to go ahead and start blocking this area off. So what I'm going to do is take a little bit of this tape, and I know it's going to be roughly right about here. I'm not too crazy worried about being specific with the location just yet. This is just the start. to masking everything off. And I take the wax paper, and I use wax paper simply because it won't stick. It's pretty cheap. You can get it for pennies, and it's great to protect the rest of the knife with. So we got the blade protected. Now what we need to do is define where this is going to stop at, how far up we want it to go. The reason I try to do this with tape is because it helps me line it up. I learned one time, a long time ago, that when you're putting these scales on, if you don't line it up beforehand and you try to do it after the fact, it's harder to eyeball it. So I know that I want my scales to end, as I said before, right about here. So I have a starting point and I have an end point. And this is, give me 1 second, it's hard to do upside down. Okay, so I've got it lined up sitting here. Then I'm going to fold it over. I'm going to take the bottom and just kind of throw it off to the side, stick it down, throw it out of the way, and just kind of mash it down like that. I need to define the top. So I need to go this way, and I'm also going to go off to the side here. I'm not worried about this side being perfect. Not yet. We're going to deal with that right now. So what I'll end up doing at this point is taking another piece of tape, and I've got my starting point right here. I know that's going to work at the top, and I need to eyeball it for the bottom. So give me a second. Okay, so after finagling and working it, you want to get it as close to perfect as possible. It's never going to be 100% perfect. I'm sure there's somebody out there looking at their knives going, yep, well, mine's perfect. And you know what? If you hook it up to a laser micrometer or something like that, you're going to find it's off to some degree. At the end of the day, even if you talk to people that do interior decorating for a living, more important than something being level on the wall, based on the level tool itself, is your eye. If your eye doesn't like the way it looks, it doesn't matter what the measurement looks like. So I sit here and I take a few minutes, and you see me with the razor blade. You know, I use the edge of the razor blade and make a true line here and make sure that it's matched here, at the top and at the bottom. I can't emphasize enough. Preparation, preparation, preparation. And no, not preparation H. If you take the time and do the prep work properly, you're going to be very happy with the results. Again, pretend, like I've said before, pretend this is it. This is the last step. I'm going to deliver the knife like this. If you try to make this perfect, every time through this process, when you go further and further, you're going to find you're going to get a much better result. Okay, so we've got it taped up, and we've got a nice true line here, and we're going to, if we take our scale, I know it's going to stop. It's going to stop when it hits that line. So I know basically from feel, I can set it up there, get it lined up, squish it down, and I'm good to go. What you're going to do at this point is you're going to get a trustworthy brand name epoxy. I happen to use West Systems products, and I'll put a link to their website down below. And they have a good system. It comes in the gallons and the quarts, and it seems expensive to get it like that. You could really use Gorilla Glue if you're only going to be making 1 or 2 knives, or go to whatever hardware store you want and pick up whatever adhesive you trust. I use the 3M because I buy it in bulk. It's cheaper, and you know, when I've got a few other knives that I'm putting handles on, not just this one. So I'll measure out the appropriate amount. I'll do this knife, and then I'll go do the other ones as well, and get get them all done at one shot. The next step at this point is going to be to scratch up this surface a little bit, and I'm also going to sand up the surfaces here as well. Now I'm going to tell you right up front, scratching up the surface does help. I would never not do that. It does help. But it is not the end-all, be-all of adhesion. Essentially what you're doing is scratching up the surface. Think of it this way. If you take your hand and you rub it over something smooth, it's going to go like this. Now, if I take a piece of sandpaper and put it down there and try to rub my hand over it, it's going to be very abrasive. It's going to be very difficult, and it's going to scratch my hands up. So when you put all those little bumps and ridges in this knife or in this handle, that epoxy has something to stick to hold things in place. In my opinion, the real power to putting these handles on will come later when we put the hardware on. But I'll get more about that later. I don't want to get ahead of myself. Okay, well, as you can see, I went ahead and mixed up, well, I got some epoxy ready to get mixed up. Grabbed me a little brush here, a couple of rubber gloves, stir stick, an old popsicle stick got from Michael's. Scratched everything up, got it nice and clean and flat, made sure everything was perfect. Again, this is the time to not be chintzy with the details. Now, a little word to the wise regarding putting epoxy on. It's going to get messy. It's going to be messy. You can do everything you can to control the mess, and you should never drink while you're working with epoxy. Absolutely not, ever, ever, never. Move that out of the way. Right now, I've got my hands spotlessly clean, or I've got my items spotlessly clean. One more time with the gloves on. I don't want to get any oils or anything on here. Like I said, this is the time to be picky with details. Take a minute, mix the epoxy up as described. And what I'm going to do is essentially paint on here. I've seen guys put these scales on and just go through and just glopulate, a gallon and a half of epoxy on here. Look, there is a point of diminishing returns when it comes to any of that stuff. Think of these items, even though they're not, think of them as a sponge. They're only capable of absorbing so much of this epoxy. After that, it starts dripping and it starts leaking, and all that drippage, all that extra stuff, that's nothing but pure waste. So at the end of the day, you want to be smart, you want to be liberal with this stuff, but you don't want to be ridiculous. You don't want to be just, dunking your stuff in there and hoping to God it's okay. Now, I usually take, especially when I'm dealing with this kind of material, I'll put it on here, and you know what? Talking to you guys, I almost forgot one key step. You want to protect that front, like I had said before. Protecting that front is definitely going to be key, because you don't want to have to try to clean that after the fact. Now I'm going to let that soak for a minute. The reason I'm going to let it soak is because these scales, although they're already impregnated with epoxy, there's still some material in there that can absorb this. When you scratch up the surface, you kind of open up those fibers. You do more when you're dealing with these liners based on the material. You're doing more than just scratching the epoxy coat. You're actually waking up the fibers again. So I give that a minute to soak. And while it's soaking there, I take and just kind of paint over here. Okay, we're going to take our time again. We're going to be patient. There's no rush here. This is slow curing epoxy. It won't be ready for me to mess with again until tomorrow. It's a Friday night, and I won't be able to touch this until tomorrow afternoon sometime, and that's perfectly fine with me. I'm not in any rush to pop 100 of these out tomorrow. When you put this on, you want to be careful for your alignments. You want to be sure that you've got the wood covering all of the metal. But you don't want to leave so much on there that you're going to be all night grinding both sides. I put it on here for a second. I make sure that it's lined up to that tape line up front. Kind of mash it down. Move it around a little bit. It's going to slide, and that's perfectly fine. If you let it slide, it's like buttering tile. If you let it slide, it makes sure that the coverage is everywhere. I'm happy with the alignment right here. It's at the top and at the bottom where I need it to be. I'm going to let this sit for a second, and we'll go ahead and put the clamps on in just a moment. So I'll be right back. Here. That's not perfect. That's not complete. That's just holding it long enough for me to check it out. Make sure it didn't move. Line everything back up. Get it perfect. Again, this is the time to be meticulous. Alright, that's clear. Okay, that's clear. Now, I always take and let this sit on top of some epoxy. I'm sorry, let this sit on top of the wax paper, drip off, and get perfect. And that's what I'm going to do here with this right now. Hey guys, how's everyone doing today? Alright, well, it has been more than a couple of days since we installed the first scale on our knife. We're out here in the shop, as you obviously can tell. And the scale has dried up completely. It's definitely on there. I was going to get out here the next day, but I couldn't get around to it. I was just a little bit too busy. Another extra day or so of curing is perfectly fine. It's not going to really mess anything up. What it's time to do at this point is I'm going to pop on over to the drill press, and I'm going to go ahead and mark the holes that are currently in the blank, and I'm going to go ahead and put them all the way through this side. There's 3 holes. There's going to be 2 for pins and 1 for a lanyard hole. We're going to go over to the drill press and take care of those right now. Yeah. A little bit messy around here, guys. I apologize for that. Okay, well, before I call it quits, there's one more thing that I like to do. While I have it down here, I'm going to go ahead and cut off this tail. Chop saw is just really easy to get that done with, and I can do it at this point. It's cured on here well enough, so I don't have to worry about it popping off or anything. And to me, it just makes sense to get it out of the way now. It's that much less sanding we'll have to do later, and just far less material to remove, and just going to save a lot of time. Hey guys, well, as you can see, we've got the handle on. Essentially all I did was repeat the process on this side that I did over here. And again, like I did before on the chop saw, I'm going to cut off a lot of the waste here, and just to save some sanding. I've seen people omit that step in the past, and really it's personal preference. I mean, if you want to go through and have a belt sander take it off, that's perfectly fine. I've also seen people try to cut it to basic shape beforehand. It's really 6 one way, half a dozen the other. Personally, I've always been a little apprehensive about trying to cut it to final fit before I glue the scales on. That's just me. Others may find it the only way to do it or the best way to do it, and that's perfectly fine. Again, when it comes to doing something like this, you want to go ahead and be sure that once you've gone through the step in the process, look back and ask yourself, you know, for me, it would have been easier to do this, or maybe I should have done it this way. So again, you're going to put your own flavor on this when you go to do your own knife. All right, well, here we are. I've got the holes cleaned out, and I went ahead and just hit it a little bit on the belt sander just to kind of clean up the edges a little bit. I'm not trying to shape it at this point, just easier to handle while I'm working on it. This is the point where you're going to want to consider what type of hardware you're going to use to affix the handle to the blank, or the blade rather. A lot of options, a lot of choices. You don't have to use anything. I highly recommend though that you do. Whether you use pins, there are mosaic pins, regular standard brass pins, stainless steel. I believe there's even synthetic type materials. Or whether you use some kind of a bolt and nut type system like these loveless bolts that I've got here, which is what I'll be using. At the end of the day, the hardware is what really gives the holding power to the handle, at least in my opinion. These loveless bolts are built in such a way that when you put it through the hole is actually a two-stage hole. It's a smaller hole which holds the bolt all the way through the piece. And just above where the handle material begins to end, right about this point right here, somewhere in that area, a larger hole is put in to allow for the rounded nut that they have. What that does is give you a bit of a step for the hardware to hold on to. So essentially what's going to happen, this is going to go all the way through the piece, and there's going to be a little bit of a lip that's going to catch the nut. When you put the mating nut on the other side and tighten it together, it acts like a clamp. It pulls everything together. That really gives you an extremely strong, secure attachment to the piece, and to me is just a superior hold. The back, which is also completely optional, is going to be the lanyard tube, and this is just a brass tube that fits in here. It's about 1/4 inch, and to me it just finishes it off. You don't necessarily have to do a lanyard hole at all, or if you do a lanyard hole, you don't necessarily have to put a brass tubing inside it, or stainless steel, or whatever material you're using. I like it. I think it just gives it a finished look, and I think most of the knives you see that sport a lanyard hole with this, with this type of design, they're going to have some type of a tube inside. So what else am I going to use besides this? Well, essentially, these are all the parts that I need. And when I put everything together, I could go right in right now, probably put everything together and be done with it. However, I take it a step further, and I know a lot of people do as well. It's pretty common practice, as a matter of fact, to go ahead and use some epoxy in these holes. Now, the epoxies are going to do a couple of things. Number one, as I put these bolts into the setup, before I get them ready, I'm going to leave it backed off about that far, and I'll use a little bit of the epoxy as kind of a thread lock. I mean, sure, you could use thread lock. I've done both ways. It's easier because all I have to do is use the epoxy that I've got here. Yeah, that's a lot of epoxy. It's probably way too much, but I got a couple of other projects that I'm going to be able to use it on. I like to clean off the surfaces real quickly before I get started, before I get too far. And I use a little bit of just rubbing alcohol. I've heard people say don't use it. I've heard people say whatever you do, don't not use it. I've had success with it. It's just a quick rinse there. Got a little bit of a Q-tip right here, and I'm going to use that to clean inside the holes, just to get off some of the surface dust. If this part isn't exactly critical, you can leave it out, and I have left it out most times. No problem at all. But again, just can't hurt. Alright, now what I'm going to do, I'll start at the top here. I like to fill this with epoxy first, just get around all the edges just to be sure that it's going to get total coverage. Then I'll take this piece and paint it on the outside as well, paint it on the threads. You know, I'm generally pretty conservative when it comes to using epoxy. I think people overdo it. The only reason that I'm not too picky about it at this stage of the game is because I am trying to fill in cracks and crevices, and the grain will do some a fairly effective job of soaking up some of the epoxy, all those fresh cut fibers from the drill bit. All right, you want it nice and tight when you get it all complete, and you'll notice that the bolts are pretty well sank in there. They're not all the way through. There's a very little bit holding itself up, and essentially you can see that I've left myself enough meat down here for the bolt to hold on to give it that clamping pressure I talked about a second ago. I'm going to repeat that process here and here, and after that we'll be done. And perfect, all the way through. What I think I'm going to do, because this video is getting kind of long, I'm going to go ahead and stop it here, and we'll do a little bit of shaping on the next video, and I'll show you how to finalize your shape and things to consider there. I think this covered quite a bit, so guys, we'll see you in the next one, and the next one will in fact be the last one where we're going to go ahead and finish getting this knife together. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for sticking around through the whole video. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you have not already done so. I'm going to leave a link in the video's description below to the remainder of this series. If you haven't caught up on any of the other back videos, now would be a great time to do it. And you guys have a great day. I'll see you in the woods.